you end up realizing how much God takes care of you, and you end up almost being a placeholder. Like, that idea of a conduit is very true and very real when you get over there, and then you end up stepping back and watching God use you.
It is such a privilege to give you this glimpse into this conversation with a missionary Justin Dye. I hope it's a blessing to you. I'm also very excited about how the Lord's leading with some upcoming interviews. We'll be talking to a young lady that's battling a very deadly case of cancer here in the near future. So if you would, if these conversations are in any way a help to you, share them with somebody else, but then consider subscribing to this channel as well with upcoming interviews, talking to some of God's choicest servants. Now listen on. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the Micah McCurry podcast. I am here with missionary Justin Dye, and we're just going to jump right into it. Brother Dye, if you would, give us a short synopsis, who you are, maybe even dabble with your salvation testimony, but just give us a quick introduction to who you are.
Sure. My name is Justin Dye. I am a missionary working in Papua New Guinea. My wife's name is Kaylee, and then we've got three little girls, Adrian, Juliet, and Madeline. And they're 5, 3, and 9 months, so young kids still. We work in Pangaea, Papua New Guinea. We're in the Southern Highlands, we're basically right on the edge of the bush. I live at the last power pole on our highway, and then any of our ministry work is off in jungle villages. And we work with Chad Wells and Kirsten Wells. They're missionaries. They've been there for I think they're working on their 12th year right now, but he's a second generation missionary. We're out of Faith Bible Baptist Church in Eden, New York, just south of Buffalo. And so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents got saved when I was 2. And they've never been out of church since. We've always been in church. My dad was military, which yours was too. So you understand that. You move around a little bit, but we were always in a good church. And at 8 years old, having heard the gospel multiple times from nursery age all the way up to through Sunday school and stuff. At 8 years old, on a Wednesday night, I was able to trust Christ as my Savior. Like I said, we had grown up in a Christian home. Parents saved it too, so I had been through Sunday school and nursery, been hearing the gospel for about 6 years at that point, and it was just a Wednesday night that with a Wednesday night service that was a typical Baptist Bible study. Didn't have anything to do with salvation. Didn't have anything to do with even an invitation afterwards directed towards salvation. But the Holy Spirit basically convicted me and used all that I had been hearing for the past 2 years. And, I was really thankful about that. Looking back now, I know people who've gotten saved younger than I did. But for me, in my mind, I needed it to be real.
Sure.
And I can look back now and definitely look at the Holy Spirit's involvement as opposed to being convinced or swayed by some human words. And that it's really been a blessing to be able to see that. And now as we're trying to bring our kids to salvation, it's something important in our life too. But like I said, just a Christian family, dad in the military, parents saved when I was young. And I'm the first in our family for being in the ministry. I don't have pastors or missionaries as extended family or anything like that. But still, just a blessing to to have gotten saved.
So, working in Papua New Guinea, one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? You could say from a Westerner's perspective, and an American who's used to air conditioning and all of those things, a pretty forbidding area for a lot of folks that are used to Western comforts. And so talk a little bit about the Lord leading you in that direction, if you would.
So, as a teenager, again, growing up in church, not ever been out of church, going to things like teen camp, going to youth rallies, and then, all that kind of stuff plays a part in it. And God dealt with me when I was 15. Went on my first missions trip. Went to visit Craig Ledbetter in Ireland, and fantastic guy, fantastic missionary, still over there. And that was the jarring experience that I need to get me off of planning out my own life. And I didn't have a calling to Papua New Guinea as a teenager, and even as a young adult. I knew God wanted, He had claim on my life, and I thought it was missions. God just had to work through and grow me through through our church and some of those experiences. But shortly after I got married to Kaylee, after in 2012, after both of us had been on multiple missions trips and gone different places and never had a leading specifically somewhere, I've even had missionaries ask us, would you come over and work with us? And it just never really worked out, never really was the right move. But we visited Chad 4 months after we got married, took 3 weeks there. And at the end of that 3 weeks, Chad was talking about printing the Bibles in the King James Pidgin language, or well, not the King James Pidgin language, but King James Bible in the Pidgin language. And he was just starting that project, asked us to come over and help him. And I just went back to our little house that we were staying in, the little guest house, and asked Kaylee, again, being married for 4 months only, asked her if she'd be willing to come back and talk to some of the biblical authority in my life, the pastors that we had leading us, talk to my parents and my in-laws, again, just getting out on our own, and everybody was for it. God started to open up doors immediately. So, he just, I guess the best way I can say it is kind of like the Macedonian call that Paul had, where he was trying to go places, trying to figure out what God wanted for him. And, overnight this is the place. And that's kind of what it felt like for us. And it's just been an adventure getting there and living there. So
Absolutely. And how much, and I may be completely wrong in this, how much growing up in a military household, and I'm assuming moved around a reasonable bit here and there, how much did that play in you just being willing to kind of just obviously just took surrender to God, or yieldedness, I should say, to God? But do you think that background played any role in it feeling a little bit more like an adventure than this thing that I'm dreading? Or maybe I'm completely wrong, but would you speak to that a little bit?
no, I definitely think you're onto something, because moving around as a little kid and as a young teenager and having to make friends, and you're not really ever attached to anywhere for long, and you've already learned how to say goodbye. That stuff definitely came in. It helped when it
Right.
came time to, or sitting up there at the Toronto airport, hugging people, trying to check in, and then starting this adventure. So yeah, I think that the fact that, I mean, Kaylee's not military, but her dad moved around quite a bit, almost the same amount that we did as a military family. And for both of us, we know that family's back here and family's important to us. But we had already learned kind of how to say goodbye. And I don't want to make that sound callous. Our family knows that we love them, and our church knows that we love them, but it's just a skill you pick up, saying goodbye and just making it kind of succinct and, okay, we'll see you later.
Right. And of course, we have the assurance of heaven and all of those things.
Absolutely.
But I have tried to figure out if I'm just emotionally stunted or what my issue is, because not that I enjoy saying goodbye by any stretch, but it's being able to, and it may be part of being a man as well, being able to compartmentalize things to the chagrin of those around me sometimes, compartmentalizing too much. But I do wonder sometimes. But I think at the end of the day, regardless of the upbringing, it really just comes down to yieldedness to what God wants. Because no matter how difficult the goodbyes are, if it's God's will, then everything's a-okay. It's all right. We can keep going.
That's definitely true, and that's what we found, and even some of what I'm sure we'll get into later on, with their experiences over the past year. Um, this lesson goes back to that exact same lesson. There's some things you can't control. I mean, who we are around, you can't control, but God gave us kind of some companionship. We work with that team of missions. We work with Chad and Kirsten. We've got Melanie Ellis, a single lady over there who teaches in our school. And man, that bond of friendship is something that has kind of softened the blow of leaving our home church and leaving our family. But I'll tell you what, we keep in contact with anybody who's willing to keep in contact with us through things like Marco Polo and WhatsApp. And over breakfast, nighttime for you guys are all going to sleep. It's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Most people are turning off their phones or whatever. And we're sitting over breakfast recording Marco Polos, and that's helped too. And I don't, I read stories of, all these missionaries that came before us, Adoniram, Justin, and these guys who just went off in a straight line into the jungle and never looked back. And I feel like a lousy missionary, but it's also a provision of God. I live in a place where I do have a little bit of cell phone service. It's not regular, it's not fast, but I got some, and that kind of stuff helps too. But God makes a way, and He gives you what you need to fill some of those voids that happen.
Sure. And obviously, you being in the States right now is the only thing that allows this intercommunication to happen this rapidly and all of that. And may get a little frustrated with the reception we have right now, but I'm sure it's light years better than what you have there. What is the internet situation there as far as the amount of service you have? Is there bandwidth issues? Are there caps on how much you can do, and how many Marco Polos can you send in a month? All those things.
So we've got a cell tower right in town. I can see it from my porch. But the fastest it's a 3G network, and it's prohibitively expensive. Americans pay on average about $10 a gigabyte. We're up $15 to $20 sometimes. And so we pick and choose what we want. Sometimes I'm downloading repair manuals and PDFs, or watching YouTube videos and trying to keep a truck running. And sometimes I'm able to send that on Marco Polos. And, it's in and out, power's in and out almost every day. And that affects our coverage too. The tower will go down, and it'll be down for a day and a half, and then it'll come back in the middle of the night, and I'll get a pile of text messages and a bunch of emails. And, that's just life over there, though. It's all right. Yep. You adjust.
Well, we'll be keeping a keen eye to the sky and see if Elon Musk and some of these folks can actually provide real satellite internet and all those things that they keep talking about. We'll see if that actually happens, and hopefully so for your sake over there in PNG. Now, you said you're at this point where you're one of the last at the line of where the bush becomes the real thing, and that's where you guys are at. Talk about going back in there and some of the cultural differences between what we know here in America and the way things are there. Simple things now, unfortunately, in America, this is becoming more scarce, but just honesty and integrity and those things that are kind of not taken for granted like they are here, and things like that. Talk about, for that from the native side, things that you are dealing with, not only spiritually, but just culturally, to even be able to get the message of the gospel across.
Yeah, so we live on Pangaea Station. It's a government station. I actually have a paved road that comes right to where our mission station is. But to get to any of our ministries, we turn off of that onto a stone road, and then further back, even it's just mud. It's just dirt. You need 4-wheel drive to get back there. And we're in the Wiru Valley. We're at 5,500 feet above sea level in a valley. We're ringed about by mountains, and so the Wiru tribe, which is a pretty large tribe as far as highlands tribes go, pretty influential. We've got about 20 to 30,000 people in our valley, and maybe about a third of those house lines you can access by road, and then the rest is walking. So currently we're working with a village called Kumiane, and I can actually see Kumiane from my house. You got to cross the river and cross the little gorge. It's about a mile straight from my house, but it takes about 20 minutes to drive there. And, it's almost, once we cross the bridge out of Pangaea, because there's not electricity where we're ministering, even a mile away, it's kind of like Papua New Guinea 5 or 10 years ago. And even culturally that shows up. If you hang around the high school kids in Pangaea, it's different than hanging around the high school age kids a mile away in Kumiane. And as we go, you start to learn about, like you said, some of the cultural differences. And one of the things that was apparent back in February is that news travels fast in the jungle, and you are known by the very fact that I'm a foreigner and I'm driving vehicles that are very recognizable. And I think it was back in April of last year. I was driving it's a 16-foot flatbed. It's kind of our utility truck. And I was going and picking up some supplies from about an hour away, almost at the end of that road that we take. and driving back, and I had, the roads over there. We have shoulders in the United States. They have no shoulder. It's this road, and then it's down a foot or more into just scrub grass or jungle undergrowth. And I cut a corner too close, ended up ditching that vehicle, and we had to unload it, and I had a bunch of guys with me. I ended up trying to push that out, and then I ended up cutting through the jungle, climbing the cliff, that gorge that separates us from a bunch of stuff, crossing the river, climbing a cliff, grabbing another truck and a tow strap, driving back, getting that. And, so I'm embarrassed because it happened, and Chad was out of the country at the time. So I'm like, Chad, I don't think I broke your truck, but I did put it in a ditch. So, but it's all safe now. It's all handled. And I was surprised because, a week or two later, I was going back. And again, I'm almost an hour from where we live. And yet these people are like, oh, yeah, you're the new missionary who put a vehicle in a ditch. He was only there about 2 hours, and they had already heard about it, and, all that. It's very community oriented. They're very, the tribe mind is still there. The where they live and the ground they live on is very important to them. And so that ends up translating into how we plant churches too. We've got probably about 40 churches in the Wiru Valley. But you'd never know that because it's very hard to see all of them. And, people don't walk 3 hours to go to church necessarily. They want a church in their house line. And so I've got a church in about 20 minutes away, maybe 10 minutes drive, or a half hour walk. There's another Baptist church, but we are ministering to two different groups of people. They're ministering to a couple thousand in their house line, and the church we're starting is ministering to a couple thousand in our house line. And, like I said, we're a mile from the government station, and on our mission station, there's a Baptist church, but they don't mix quite that well. And so we end up with a lot of small churches as opposed to like a huge hub church where everybody comes in.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, it's amazing to hear just the intricacies of how ministry is different, and we try to copy and paste the way we do things sometimes, and it doesn't work out that well for us.
No.
The fact that the gospel does transcend cultural boundaries and the opportunity that is there is amazing to hear. So, what is the plan for you folks as far as the Lord leading back with all of this nonsense and all these things going on? What was the time frame originally supposed to be? I know your youngest daughter comes into play with that somewhat, and then the path back. What does that look like?
Yeah, so originally we got back to the U.S. The day before Thanksgiving, and we were trying to get back to New Guinea by May, and we were kind of on track to do that. And then March happened, and the U.S. kind of shut down for at least, especially our end of the country. This northeast end of the country really just shut down. New York City got hit really hard, and New Guinea also shut down at about the same time. And we had just been back and forth in February. We had to travel to the U.S. Embassy in Port Moresby to get some paperwork done for Madeline's birth certificate and her passport and all that. With the way the State Department's rules are, you can't take care of that inside the U.S. And our situation was special and not really supposed to happen. So we took a trip back in February just to the capital for a half-hour visit at the embassy, turned around and came back. And then New Guinea set up 2-week quarantines and stuff like that, and you still have to write and ask for permission to come in, but I think the government considers us essential enough that we don't have a problem getting back in.
Good.
But it's still kind of a process, and it's inconvenient, and it adds to your airfare, if I could put it that way. It basically is going to cost us an extra $2,000 to stay in the capital at a hotel that's approved by them for, with meals and all that provided, on top of the airfare to get over there. So, we're watching it, and we're keeping tabs on it. We still have some things to take care of back here, paperwork-wise mostly, just because government agencies have been shut down. And at this point, we're hoping and praying for October, and it just depends on the speed of government, I guess, is a good way to put it at this point. But yeah, they shut down domestic travel for a while back in April, and you couldn't even move. You couldn't even drive between provinces, and it really hurt and put some of the missionaries that are still there just kind of limited them, especially us, where we shop and where we get our supplies from. That's a province away. And so, then you're living off of rice and whatever you can buy at the market, fruits and vegetables wise, as opposed to some of the other supplies we're used to getting. But since then, New Guinea's kind of opened back up domestically. I know the Prime Minister released a statement a couple weeks ago that they aren't going to lock everything back down. They know that they're a third world country and can't really handle COVID-19 the way first world countries are trying to. And so I'm hoping and praying that, again, that kind of translates over to international travel too. We'll see.
Absolutely.
We'll see what happens.
Amen. Well, we will pray that way. So October timeframe, and for those that might happen to, and might this is one of the reasons why I like to have missionaries on. If by some chance it gives someone an inkling that hey, maybe they should be supporting you, how would they go about that? If they'd like to, sending church and where support would go to, and how they could contact you on social media and things like that.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. You can search me for through Justin Dye. You can also go to my home church's website, fbbc.com. It stands for Faith Bible Baptist Church.com, FBBC. And there's a link to my page on that website. All of our support details are there. If you follow us on Facebook, you can feel free to message me, and you can get in contact with us through our email address, dyes.png@gmail.com. So dyes.png@gmail.com. And like I said, I check all that. So
Sure.
communication is more than welcome. So.
And just so people do have an understanding as far as the needs and things, what are so we've already mentioned about $2,000 extra dollars just to get back in the country and things like that. What are some other needs or even support levels and things that people could even just pray for you about?
Sure. So we raised, since we came back on an impromptu furlough, that means I won't be able to furlough on schedule. So we're kind of combining the extra cost of the medical side for Madeline with what we know that we need for ministry. And so I'm about $500 a month away from that goal. So not too much ground to cover, considering that I had a bunch of churches that were, it seemed like likely support. Obviously, you can't ever promise any of that, but a bunch of those meetings got canceled, and I've got kind of rain checks on those meetings. But like I said, we need about 500 more a month. We're saving up for the airfare to get back. Typically, it costs about $5,000 to $7,000 airfare to get our family back and forth. And then, like I said, if the quarantine's still in effect, that's another couple thousand for accommodations until we can get into the interior of the country. We are also praying for funds for a vehicle. We've got some money towards that. We'll probably need, realistically, another $10,000 towards that. Vehicles are just super expensive in Papua New Guinea. I'm trying to buy something that's a 1990s Toyota Land Cruiser, and it's going to be several $1,000s, and then getting it so it can traverse the things that I'm going to try and put it through to get back to where we can. I can say that a lot of our medical needs are just about all paid for, and God's really come through on that. So I've got no reason to doubt Him for the other things that we
Amen.
need. It's just kind of just of a time game. Apparently, we don't need it today.
That's what I've realized. The what and the why and all of those things are normally pretty easy to figure out. The what's of God's will. It's the when. That's the hard part. The when is always the difficult thing. And so appreciate the fact that you're willing to be patient and wait on God that way. So you have your wife and the 3 little girls and all of those things. I'm sure they're enjoying being able to spend some extended time with family, especially the little one and things like that. I know Brother Crone and so many of the churches up in that neck of the woods have been such faithful supporters and been such a big help. And I know with this camp season being canceled and things there at Common Ground, I'm sure that was a bummer for so many folks and so much fellowship that was going to be had. But what does your schedule look like as far as being able to get back into churches? Do you have some gaps open in your schedule for pastors that maybe want to plug you in, or do you have enough rain checks that you think you're going to be booked up through your departure?
So we've got the end of August and the beginning of September booked. I'm working on getting, I've got a lot of, it's kind of, you end up finding churches that can have you in right away. Our meeting this week was a guy who had other missionaries cancel because the way New York's being right now, trying to get into the state and do that. So I was able to take up some of that time. and trying to plan our travel through the fall, not knowing when we're going to leave or if we're going to leave. So I still have opportunities in September and October. Um, it I will book, November and December, but you get almost like a literal pain doing that, knowing,
Sure.
oh, this could be reality. I might still be in the U.S., but so the fall and into early winter, we'll definitely make plans with churches. And so far, most of my meetings have only been a couple weeks out because, everything's been up in the air, and pastors that not everybody's tried to schedule too far out.
Right.
So we definitely still have some room where we can book things, but
Absolutely. Well, we'll just pray that maybe even without booking too many more meetings, the Lord will just bring in the support that is necessary and allow you guys to get back over there, and definitely be praying for the needs that are. Would you say you've already mentioned some of the needs, but would there be a specific prayer request just at the top of the list that you'd ask people to pray for, financially or otherwise?
uh, yeah, I guess the standard request that we've been giving out, just because it does seem pretty insurmountable with the amount of money, is just that vehicle.
Hmm.
Um, we're gonna we went, and working with Chad, we have access to some of his vehicles, but with Maddie and the situation that she's in, we'd feel a little bit more secure if we had our own vehicle, that I don't gotta wake someone up at 3 a.m. and say, hey, I'm taking this, I'll see you in a couple days. You
Right.
know what I mean? So
Right.
that's kind of what we're working towards with that. and
Absolutely.
and our ministry is handcuffed to local area, which, not that there's want of ministry opportunities around us, but there definitely are needs, an hour away,
That
45
that
minutes
does
away.
remind me. Is do you have any inkling or bush pilots and things like that? Is that something that could be a part of the ministry in the future, or does your area even allow for it with jungle cover and things like that?
No, absolutely, and that's something that I know is it's in Chad's long-term plan, just because there aren't any immediate doors opened right now. And I've got a background in flying too. I soloed in an airplane, and so Pangaea, because it's a government station, we actually have an airstrip, and up until a couple years ago, it was just grass, but it was landable. You could land there with any bush plane, and they're actually redoing it right now. It's going to be a fully paved tarmac, because
Wow.
there's actually an Israeli French fry company that built a factory in Pangaea, and so they buy up a lot of the crops around our area, and they flash freeze and get French fries ready. And their intent is to be able to have direct flights out of Pangaea back to Israel. And in February of this past year, we traveled to a village called Arave. It's another government station. It's probably the most remote government station in our province, and it took about 4 hours to drive there in a straight line. It's only about 40 kilometers from where we live,
Wow.
but you have to cross about three mountain ranges and go on roads that, again, it's good if you have four-wheel drive, especially if it gets wet. It took about 4 hours to drive there. They've got a grass strip there that you can land a Cessna 182 if it's outfitted for short takeoff, short landing. And there's a national pastor there, Pastor Timothy, who lives about a half-hour drive from that station, and he has had a church where he lives, and he asked us to come out and do a tent meeting in Arave Station. And so we went out with Chad and with another missionary and set up the tent, did 4 days of meetings, and there was 50 people saved at that meeting. And that was, with two new missionaries who had to preach through translators, and
Wow.
we don't know anything because we had just gotten there a month and a half before. And that area is super open. It would take about 5 minutes to fly there once you got up and turned in the right direction. About 5 minutes, or a 4 hour drive beating up your vehicles. And so that is absolutely 100% something that could be a tool in the future, and could help with things.
Absolutely. Just for curiosity's sake, would that direct flight to Israel, would that be something that, like a cargo plane, that you folks would be able to make use of? I'm sure that'd be incredibly convenient, if it's possible. I have no idea, and with new travel restrictions and all of that, I'd be curious. But is that something that would even be a possibility?
This is definitely something we've discussed over coffee sitting in Chad's living room. I don't know if it will be, I don't know if there's going to be special exemptions or like a special immigration office set up in Pengia to make that happen, or
Sure.
if now that the prime minister is different, our prime minister, when all this was agreed upon and when they were starting all this, was our member of parliament. And
Okay.
since then, the political landscape's changed. So it might be a thing where they're flying shipments to Hagen, which again, 2 hour drive for us, about 8 minute flight if you're in a single engine airplane. They might just ferry it over there, and then Hagen will be the international hub. But either way, moving an international airport into the Highlands would be extremely beneficial for us because at this point we fly into Moresby and then have to catch domestic flights, which you know, dollars for miles are just not cheap.
Right. Well,
So
and even though you'd be going the wrong way around, it would still be, I mean, just being able to get to Israel because there are legitimate, direct flights. That'd be just one stop instead of, I'm guessing, how many stops are there normally? How many legs, I should say, are there normally on a flight from where you are to get to LA or wherever you fly out of, or JFK, wherever it happens to be? Toronto, I
right,
guess.
yeah. So if you fly across the U.S., you've got to connect to either uh, Chicago, Dallas, or LA are going to be your options.
Okay.
Possibly Atlanta, and from there you'd either fly to Australia or you'd fly to Manila or Hong Kong or Singapore.
Yep.
From those countries, it's a flight in, and then we've got one flight, and then, like I said, a 2 hour drive
Hmm.
inside of the country. And so
Right.
we're kind of blessed living so close to Toronto. At least, when everything was open, we could drive up to Toronto. We'd have one flight to Hong Kong or Manila, one flight to Moresby, one flight in, which was huge
Hmm.
compared to the first time that we were around the world. So flying back through Israel and Europe is just as feasible as flying through Asia. It comes down to timing and airfare really we search all that out and then just pick the best route for us. But
Absolutely.
yeah, a direct flight to Israel would be a way more comfortable,
Very cool.
especially if the plane, I can see it from my house in the morning before I go board it.
Awesome. Well, I greatly appreciate you taking the time, and I pray for those that may be listening that it might have been just a little bit of an encouragement, and also just to consider that even in these times, who knows when the Lord's coming back, but until then, I realized recently it doesn't really matter when the Lord's coming back. We still have a lot of work to do. It couldn't if it was tomorrow, next year, or 1,000 years from now. We've got plenty to do to keep us busy, and not that we don't need to keep our eyes to the skies, but at the same time, we've got a lot of keep our eye on the shovel in our hand because we got a lot of work to do right down here. And so, any last thoughts for those that might be listening right now?
Yeah, I would just say, for those of us, or for those of you who have followed our story with Madeline and coming back with a medical emergency, and learning through all this stuff. I was telling a missionary friend that these guys are all back in the States and they're reading their Bibles and theology books and kind of getting some of that down, and I feel like we've been left behind because of the medical information that we've had to absorb and become proficient at. But it kind of goes to what we said earlier in, in the conversation with how God makes a way for you. And even with Madeline, who's a little bit difficult to care for, and we're definitely accepting some risks, taking her back and some things. At this point, God's handled. I mean, even getting us back to the U.S. with Maddie, with her alive, was just an answer to prayer, and an instance where we're sitting there going, "Well, God, you've got to do something because I can't do anything else." And a lot of this has felt like that through coronavirus and through our timetable getting upended, and even some of the stories of being on the field and some of the situations at the end of the last year, seeing God work through something where, we had to be faithful and prudent and do the things that we knew that we ought to do, and then just trust Him to do what we couldn't control. And we found out that missions, whether it's medical stuff, whether it's you going into a village and you don't have public opinion on your side, or the two heretical churches that are inside the village before you got there are fighting you, all of that stuff, you end up realizing how much God takes care of you, and you end up almost being a placeholder. Like, that idea of a conduit is very true and very real when you get over there. And, you be obedient, you deal with the sin in your life that God brings to your life, and you be faithful in the things that you know you ought to do. And then you end up stepping back and watching God use you. And so if somebody out there is God's dealing with them about going into the ministry or going into missions, and it seems insurmountable, it kind of is from a human standpoint. But he has not let us down at all. That doesn't mean everything I've wanted has happened, but looking back, it's all been for our good and his glory. It sounds super cliche, but when you've been through it, it ends up being the best way to put it. He's got you, and he'll. Our pastor has kind of said to some other people when we came back, and as we've been around the church again, a lot of people go to pieces over some of these medical situations, and I can't sit here and say it's easy and that it was no big deal, but God gave us, and our relationship with him was enough to sustain us. And it's the same way with missions, and it's the same way in the ministry as as I talk to pastors, they've got heartache and hardship, and God's there for you, and God's with you, and wants you to succeed, and wants to help you, and does empower you. And it's awesome. It's an awesome thing to be a part of.
Amen. Well, I so greatly appreciate your time, and for those of you that are listening and have listened to the extent of this interview, thank you so much for your investment of time. If you'd consider doing a few things, number one, consider prayerfully supporting the Dye family, and as they go through this time of upheaval and different things, and try to have the Lord's wisdom as to when to go back, pray for them, and consider bringing up the Dye family at the next business meeting at your church, or when your pastor asks if you know of any good missionaries, and then stay in touch with them. And I always appreciate when people want to pray intelligently about a situation. And so stay in touch with the Dyes if you would. And if you have any questions or comments, criticism, critiques about this podcast, I know we had one or two technical difficulties, but that'll be all right. Either way, you can contact me. My text number is 309-316-7240. That is 309-316-7240. Brother Dye, thank you so much for your time. Stick around for just one moment as we sign off.